Hey everybody, Evan Narcisse, Steven Totillo back here again for another panel discussion video. We're talking about a bunch of different things this week, right?
Yep.
Mighty Avengers, which is 2 issues in, and it's a brand new series from Marvel. We're going to talk a little bit about your personal superhero reading experiences with it, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. My weird ways of reading comics.
Right.
Maybe.
And maybe we'll talk about a little bit about New York ComiCon, which is coming up this week in New York City, where we work out of. So first up, Mighty Avengers is a book that is kind of tangentially tied into the big Infinity crossover that Marvel is doing right now.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah, but it's very loose ties, which honestly is the way I like my crossover tie-ins to be, tentative at best.
Right. Earth is being invaded as part of the thing on Infinity, and this is a bunch of heroes who get together to try to stop the invaders.
Right. I've written a bit about it on the site. The thing I like about it the most is this is very much a programmatically directed attempt to diversify the Marvel universe. Like the cast is, people from various ethnic backgrounds. There's black characters, Hispanic characters. The approach feels different because it's not like that kind of top-down feel that you get from the Avengers, where it's like there's these gods from on high who occasionally save the world all the time, but the common man is not necessarily something they think about a lot. And this is from the bottom up. And there's a scene in the second issue which completely evokes that in a really specific way. I like the book a lot. I read it. You don't. Okay. Let's hear it.
Well, I think the scene you're talking about is in the second issue, I'm guessing.
That's right.
We don't plan much of this. But there's a scene where in one of the invading alien, Proxima Midnight is her name, if I'm remembering correctly, and she is beating up the superheroes. She beats the hell out of Luke Cage, and he's been knocked silly somewhere. And then some old grandma comes up, and a bunch of people starts yelling at her in Spanish, throwing bricks at her. And it's sort of like the people rising up kind of thing. That's the scene you liked, right?
Yep.
Reminds me of a scene from Grant Morrison's reboot of Action Comics from a couple of, I guess that would now be 3 Septembers ago.
Yeah, Jesus.
Although that might have even launched in August, late August, I don't remember. But and Morrison did the whole blue jeans and T-shirt Superman, which was a younger Superman that was supposed to harken back to the Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster original Action Comics in the late 30s, which was very much sort of
proletariat,
out of the Depression, sort of working man's hero and all that. And I like that, but I just felt like it was unearned in the Mighty Avengers. The book does feel like it's come out of this crossover in for what me feels like an awkward way. Like, okay, we can launch another Avengers book. Like, why does it have to be called Avengers? They even debate themselves in the first issue whether they need to be the Avengers. It feels like, I don't know, Luke Cage was such a well-written character under Brian Michael Bendis, and so he has such a clear trajectory in terms of having a girlfriend and a baby and all that kind of thing. And I just feel like the characters are sort of they're thrown in a way that doesn't really cohere to me. They're currently just reactive in responding to this crisis. And suddenly by issue 2, they're getting beaten to the brink, and the people are coming to rise up. And that worked for me when it was a Superman story, and he was this iconic figure, a hero of the people, self-styled hero of the people. And it worked in the Spider-Man movie, one of those Tobey Maguire movies, when the people are coming to rise up.
Awesome scene.
Yeah, it just didn't feel like this was earned yet.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I liked about it was that ties in neatly to the thematics of the book. But I understand what you're saying. You're feeling like they haven't set that up enough to pay off at this moment. There's that whole great scene in the first issue where Superior Spider-Man is kind of talking trash to Luke Cage about charging money for being a superhero, and it's he's like, this is what I do. And so to me, those scenes were kind of like partners. But I understand where you're coming from. The thing I liked about it is it felt like rooting for a sports team, right? It felt like, I mean, obviously the stakes are higher, but it felt like, hey, you know what? Let's cheer on the home team. Let's that famous Avengers battle cry. Let's use it to kind of get the guys, motivated and back to beating the would-be world conquerors.
Right, because the old lady starts saying Avengers Assemble.
Right.
Avengers
And look,
Assemble
it's corny, but at the same time, it's hey, you know what? If you've been in the Marvel universe for the however many years that the Avengers have been active, and you needed them to come on, get the F up and do your job, that would be one way to do it.
But they weren't even Avengers. I guess that's part of it, right? These are not really the Avengers. So it feels like Al Ewing, the writer, wanted to have this scene but it's just it didn't feel like they were established enough as the
Yeah.
characters. If it was like Captain America getting beat down,
Sure,
I could see
sure,
like the people
sure.
rising up.
You make a good point.
Superman or whatever. And then I also just be, I lionize Grant Morrison and give him a lot of leeway, possibly when I read his stuff. But it's also his stuff is really good.
Possible.
It's possible. Let's say it's all earned. It's completely earned. He's that
agreed.
good at it.
Oh, sure.
Great.
He's earned it for
Never
you.
written a bad comic. Name a bad comic Grant Morrison's written.
We're not going there. We're not going there.
Crisis is great. Superman Beyond 3D. Final Crisis Submit, not so good. Okay.
So you're trying to get you're trying to start the Morrison streak going again, right?
Yeah, I gotta bring that back. Definitely better than Alan Moore. But Mighty Avengers, it also suffers a little bit from the sort of proliferation of Avengers books that up until now I actually thought Marvel was handling pretty well. For about a decade, they've had Avengers and New Avengers, and they've had the same writer on both books for much of that time, and have managed to sort of tell two different types of Avenger stories in parallel that are semi-related. Jonathan Hickman has been doing that successfully.
Right.
Secret Avengers by Nick Spencer, who's writing that Superior Foes of Spider-Man book that we like so much, is sort of a super spy version of the Avengers. It had a lot of potential. It's a little bit going off the rails now, but it's still pretty good. Uncanny Avengers is actually cohering really well under Rick Remender. At first, I wasn't really feeling it, but the more I read it, the more I'm sort of getting where they're going. And this was, I think, also book might be suffering from my sense of another Avengers book,
Yeah.
like
In search of
call
a
it
definition.
something else.
Okay.
Do you think they called it this because they first knew they wanted to have a more diverse cast, and they said, well, how do we sell that? And so then they lopped this Avengers name on it?
Yeah, I mean, look, Luke Cage has been an Avengers character for years now, so I think that's a decent enough tie-in. I know for a fact that they couldn't have called this book Heroes for Hire and had it, be a high-profile launch. So I'm fine with the Avengers name. I do see your point about it feeling unearned at this point. But you got to assume he's going to get there. Hopefully he gets there quicker.
So, and this is actually maybe going to segue to the next topic, but
Sure.
Heroes for Hire, that was like a thing for a long time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And was that its own book?
There was at least one series called Heroes for Hire that I remember, probably more. But yeah, the characters that we know as Heroes for Hire, Power Man and Iron Fist, they were always in a Power Man and Iron Fist book. And then there was Heroes for Hire, which kind of was like a rotating cast for a while.
So this is part of like my relative lack of knowledge of Marvel.
That's right.
Which has been a thing that otherwise I've been talking to you about. Has been a real positive thing.
Yeah.
And I've been wanting to talk to you about this. So I'm gonna hijack this from you for a second.
Go ahead.
So I actually requested a topic because Evan usually tells me what to read, and I dutifully read it, except when I grouch at him. You don't give me enough time to read my books. So
grouchy.
it's my thing. I can't. Why would I not be grouchy? That's charming.
Exactly.
Charming.
You're like J. Jonah Jameson.
Exactly. And I get that reference, the J. Jonah Jameson reference. I would have always gotten that. But I've read a lot more Marvel, and I would say the last 10 years, and intensely more Marvel in the last 5 years than it's actually been like asymptotic because of more and more Marvel that I'm reading. If you track that compared to when I was a kid, and I only read DC. And a lot of people are down on the DC reboot, the New 52 right now, or quasi, whatever the hell that was, because it's not that good or whatever. But for me, part of the added fatigue or increased disinterest is because I've been through a million Justice League crossovers already. I've been through reintroductions of their characters, which they did when they did the whole post-crisis stuff in '86.
Right.
And they rolled out a new Superman, a new cast of villains, and all that. Whereas for me, for Marvel, I only recently read all of Bendis' Avengers run. I've never read any Avengers before that. I've never read a Thanos crossover before.
Right.
So to me, like Infinity is like brand new. Like I've never read a Thanos
Even though
crossover.
this is like his third or fourth one.
Yeah, I didn't read. Like I remember other kids when I was a teenager or whatever were buying like Infinity Gauntlet and stuff, but
right.
I didn't read that. So I've been raving to you. I've been raving to him about the Superior Spider-Man, and I'm like, I love this book, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's okay. And I had the epiphany that maybe it's because it's the first Spider-Man book I have
where you've been like really
read.
invested in.
Yeah, like here's this proven cast of characters like J. Jonah Jameson that like has worked for millions of people over the years.
And you're getting why.
Yeah, it's like my first exposure to that, and I'm into that.
It's interesting because when I think back to like the earliest Spider-Man runs that I identify with, I don't know, maybe Peter David on Spectacular Spider-Man, or I don't know, David Michelini on The Amazing Book, like back in the 80s, 90s. Going back, obviously, decades, right? The qualities in those books are kind of upended in Superior Spider-Man, right? Like he's not like a down on his luck, everyman who's also a superhero. He's like a highly competent super scientist who's like, being a far better Spider-Man than Peter Parker ever was. So part of it is your freshness, but probably also that it's coming at a time where the things you take for granted about Spider-Man are kind of being upended.
Yeah, it might be, but for me, there's even like in broad strokes, because I know what the style of Spider-Man is supposed to be and how he's supposed to have girlfriend problems or significant other problems,
Money problems and
all that. And there are manifestations of that. I mean, certainly Superior Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus is in over his head in a lot of what is happening. So even though he's a much more effective Spider-Man, he's got a stack of problems.
He's not a good Peter Parker.
Well, he's got a stack of problems that don't feel like what, say, Superman is dealing with day to
Sure.
day, or Batman is dealing with. So the way that, the old thing was always supposed to be that you read the Marvel characters, you're going to read these more flawed characters and troubled individuals, and Spider-Man was the epitome of that.
Yeah.
And I'm getting that even in this weird Dr. Octopusified world or way. That's a weird coinage there. Sorry. That otherwise, I'm not going to get from other characters. But this also, to me, explains my fatigue for certain things and why I think I may be more lit up by Marvel now than I am by DC. And I'm wondering if like part of the reason I can't enjoy like Scott Lobdell's Superman isn't that because it's just bad, but because I love the Byrne Superman, and nothing can hold a candle to that.
In the other example we were talking about this before was with the Green Lantern thing, right? Now all these new writers are coming in, and the first big Green Lantern crossover between the multiple series under that kind of banner is like yet another universe-spanning crisis about, all the powers, the things that power the lanterns of the spectrum may be going out. And that's...
I feel like I've read that a bunch of times.
Right, like pretty recently. And at the same time, I have to say, I've been sticking with the Green Lantern books, and I like them a lot, because I feel like they're refocusing on the central characters in a different way. And the writers' voices are coming through, which I like, and it's been increasingly rare at DC. But I understand the fatigue point. Like for me, the franchise fatigue, serial fatigue, whatever you want to call it, it makes you focus more on what's going to be different. Like, okay, you're going to give me another kind of like crisis of faith for the Green Lantern mythos. Like, how are you going to do this differently? So far, I've been intrigued, but it makes you wonder what the out is going to be at the end of it, and how, everything's supposed to be changed, but how different is that change going to feel? And that's, it's too early to say, but it's a tough conundrum to find yourself inside of.
Yeah, and I look back and I think maybe the reason a character like Batman has been so enduring is because he's been so different from era to era. Like the 60s Batman, way different than, 80s Batman, different than 90s Batman, different than 40s Batman. Arguably, maybe Batman hasn't had as many tonal shifts of late, but I'd say that he's been different enough. Because, of course, the other answer to all this could be, well, I don't like the new Green Lantern so much because Jeff Johns is a better writer than the current writer. And I don't know that you could say that, but you certainly could say that with like Swamp Thing. Like Scott Snyder is good, but he's no Alan Moore. And so it's not that I had Swamp Thing fatigue when I was less interested in Scott Snyder's Swamp Thing. It was that I've read much better Swamp Thing. And you can't really ask the new writer to do as good as Alan Moore did with that. So, I praise Alan Moore. I was going
to say that. Yeah, you can say nice things about Alan Moore.
But so I don't really know where that all lands. But I am finding it fun to basically have actively shunned Marvel for 20 years or so, or 30 years, 25 years of my life or something, and then to finally be like, okay, I'm going to read Marvel, and it's so nice. And yet I bet that like 2 years from now, because I'm already beginning to feel it, I'm going to be like enough with like Wolverine dying or near death, like, and you've probably read a million like Wolverine getting killed, getting a skeleton ripped out, and you're like, to you, it's like again.
But it's funny because like that's why it's so important that the individual voices of the creators manage to come out some way in the work that they do, because they don't own these characters, and Greg Rucka on Wolverine has to feel different than like say Daniel Way or somebody else, because otherwise what's the point? And I think that's when you get to be a certain age or have a certain amount of experience, a certain amount of XP as a comic book reader, like you realize, oh, I have to follow creators. I can't follow characters.
Right.
The pull is to follow characters, I think, because I'll always be a Nightwing fan, but I've suffered through some really bad Nightwing stories. But like, if you follow the creator, like, okay, look, I have an expectation what I'm gonna get, and sometimes when they defy your expectations, it can be good, it can be bad. But like,
Yeah, you're zeroing in on it because with Daredevil, I've gone from creator. I've only read it when there's creators I like that are involved in it. And I actually had read some Frank Miller, Daredevil. I like Mark Waid. I came back to Daredevil because I'd heard good things and it was Mark Waid. I don't read based on character at all. I totally do that. So I guess to tie that all up, the thing I guess I'm wondering is, do I like Superior Spider-Man because I hold Dan Slott in high regard and had never read any of his work before, and I'm going to now like more Dan Slott? Or am I liking it as much or even more because of the character, and this is my first time really being committed to reading a Spider-Man book, and then I'm going to like Spider-Man even more when a writer I'd like even more was on the book. Yeah. And who can say? Who can say? But I do think right now it feels like Dan Slott is hitting something that totally works for me, somebody who, I guess the Bendis Ultimate Spider-Man aside, never regularly read Spider-Man. It's good stuff.
Fair enough. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here. We didn't get a chance to talk about New York Comic Con that much, but we are going to have some New York Comic Con related coverage on the site by the time this video goes up, probably. Some of it is very personally exciting to me. Some of it will be maybe not. I don't know. But I'll be at Comic Con this week, so look for me. And Steven will not, but you can ferry any recommendations for the site through me to him.
But I am excited about the thing that you're into. I know you've been looking to do that interview for a long time. So
yeah.
That is going to be a cool thing.
Okay. Thank you very much for watching, guys.
Imagine you had a sandwich. No, imagine you had the vague promise of a sandwich. Some well-meaning person had said, yeah, we're going to be making sandwiches.